like a rite of passage and a venue for benign inter-school competition.
During maneuvers, we used firecrackers to simulate firing, and for artillery, we used the bamboo cannon.
In July 1941, Japan took over southern French Indochina. The U.S. responded sharply, freezing Japanese assets and embargoing all oil to Japan. General MacArthur was placed in command of the USAFE, the U.S. Army forces in the Far East. Reserve officers and men were called to duty, and last-minute training commenced, even as equipment and weapons awaited shipment to the Philippines.
It was the, para ba yung fad at that time, to be seen, to be counted, to be counted.
On December 8, 1941, Philippine time, Japan launched a surprise attack on the big U.S. naval base at Pearl Harbor. Within 6 hours, Japanese bombs hit Baguio and Davao without warning. The U.S. and the Philippines have been dragged into the World War.
Immediately after the mass, nag-issue ng steel helmet, nag-issue ng yung talagang sagiran talaga.
The Cadet Corps cheered because to us, we thought no more academics, no more school.
The cadet officers of the Cadet Corps were assigned to the 1st Regular Division, and most of us were assigned as commanding officers of frontline infantry companies.
Thousands of volunteers from all walks of life, many without any military training, rushed to enlist to defend their motherland. Some had to be sent home for lack of weapons.
We feel then that it is a duty to do for the country.
I told myself, I was very young then, oh, this is a good experience.
As volunteers filled the recruiting stations, those already in uniform built defensive positions in selected beaches where the Japanese might land. There, MacArthur planned to stop the enemy. The beaches would be the front lines. From the first day of the war, the Phil-American defenders were at a disadvantage. Most of the planes of the USAFE had been demolished by a surprise attack on Clark and Iba fields.
Buildings on Fort Stotzenberg were blown up. It was awful. And then about 10 minutes later, in came the Japanese Zeros, strafing and firing and bombing. It was a catastrophe.
2 days after the first wave of attack, Japanese planes destroyed the U.S. Navy base at Cavite. Filipino and American pilots flying outmoded aircraft heroically tried to challenge the swift and lethal Japanese Air Force. Among the most courageous was Captain Jesus Villamor, whose daring exploits earned him a Distinguished Service Cross. With the Japanese in control of the air and sea, the defense of the Philippines would fall on the shoulders of ordinary foot soldiers, many of whom had no idea of what war was really like.
We were singing the Hail Day Deo Hail on to the fray, as if we were going to a basketball game.
Many of them didn't even have arms in the beginning. They didn't have uniforms. Many of them didn't have anything but tennis shoes.
We have at the time the Enfield rifles on the model 1917.
Battle-tested and armed with more efficient weapons, the Japanese landed in Apari, Vigan, and Legazpi to seize airfields before arriving en masse in Lingayen Gulf on December 22. Few of these landings were seriously challenged because MacArthur initially thought that they were purely diversionary.
They had anti-tank guns, they had flamethrowers, they had big artillery pieces, they had thousands of foot soldiers. And we were not expecting that.
But after the Japanese had established beachheads and began pushing inland, MacArthur was forced to implement War Plan Orange, an old defensive plan which he had previously discarded. This called for the withdrawal of all Yusufet troops in Luzon to the thickly forested Bataan Peninsula. There, together with the heavily fortified island of Corregidor, they could deny any enemy the use of Manila and its strategic harbor. Entrenched in their positions, Yusufet troops were simply expected to hold out until reinforcements arrived.
One of the things that General MacArthur never planned for, he planned for the troops. He planned for Filipinos and Filipino scouts, the Philippine Army, and the American forces to come to Bataan. But he did not figure that there would be almost 40,000 civilians that were going to come into Bataan seeking security.
He left enormous quantities of food, ammunition, and medicine up north.
To prevent further civilian casualties and damage to property, Manila was declared an open city and cleared of military personnel. President Manuel Quezon and his family, together with select members of his cabinet, were evacuated to Corregidor. By New Year's Day 1942, all USAFER forces in Luzon were entering Bataan, confident that it would only be a matter of time before reinforcements would come. But the question was, how long could the defenders of Bataan and Corregidor hold out? On January 2, 1942, the Japanese occupied Manila. General Masaharu Homa, commander of the Japanese 14th Army, had been given 50 days to conquer the Philippines. But Homa knew that as long as the USAFER forces continued to hold Bataan and Corregidor, he could not accomplish his mission. To buy time for an active defense on Bataan, the USAFER forces set up delaying lines on the main road leading to the peninsula. The units manning these lines were tasked to stall the Japanese advance, and they did, in heroic fashion.
We had a Major Donovan, and he found a way to get rid of them. He circled the sugarcane field and set it on fire, and the Japanese came out of there in a hurry. And it was a sort of a duck shoot at that point in time.
Despite being tired from combat and a long withdrawal, the 21st Division in Pora and the 71st Division in Laya
As a young man, my grandfather was a member of the 200th Coast Artillery from New Mexico and was captured off the Bataan Peninsula in the Philippines following the attack on Pearl Harbor. After a brutal 3-month battle, close to 80,000 soldiers surrendered to the Japanese. They were wounded, suffering from disease, and malnourished. Although they lacked food and water, these prisoners, including my grandfather, were forced to march over 69 miles to prisoner of war camps in what would become known as the Bataan Death March. It did not matter if they were sick or weak. If they fell behind or were unable to walk, they were beaten or even killed. My grandfather, Private Albert Hayes, ended up in the Cabanatuan war camp, where he remained for 3 years. I am proud to say that my grandfather survived the march and was one of the battling bastards of Bataan.
In December 1941, the Japanese attacked the Philippines just hours after Pearl Harbor. The United States colony in the Pacific had a large garrison of American defenders, but this peacetime army was ill-equipped to fight a real war.
The day the war started, I was sent to the armament to pick up armament sections for our group. I picked up 4 cases of rifles and 2 cases of ammunition, all packed in 1918.
We couldn't defend ourselves against them. They had better equipment, they were in better shape, they were better trained. Everything they were, we weren't.
The Japanese invaded with modern weapons and the advantage of better supply lines. The enemy's stock of aircraft and equipment seemed almost limitless. The American troops were isolated 7,000 miles from home. They couldn't be resupplied, and their food and ammunition were running out.
First I heard of the surrender was that my commanding officer said that you're all on your own, you're free to do what you want to do. But before you do that, I want all this ammunition and all the guns completely destroyed. I disconnected my 50 caliber machine gun, took it all apart, I bent the barrel over a rock and threw it in the China Sea, and we were ready to go. We marched down into Barbados airstrip, and that's where the surrender basically took place.
When the Japanese come in, my commanding officer, he heard them coming up there, and so he got his white flag and flagged them down and surrendered the camp. And that was the way we was surrendered and captured.
We had the feeling that we'd be in disgrace back home because we surrendered. Because the U.S. Army didn't surrender.
As 70,000 American and Filipino soldiers laid down their arms, the enemy's plans for dealing with a sudden influx of prisoners were woefully inadequate. The Japanese intended to move their prisoners 60 miles north to camps in the interior.
The Japanese intelligence was all wrong. They got the numbers wrong, they got the condition of the men wrong. They didn't realize that some 80% of these men had malaria and they had dysentery and they'd been starving to death for months in the jungle.
It was a whole lot of organized confusion. They didn't know what the hell they were doing themselves. I think that they didn't realize how many people they had to put up with.
The Japanese told us everybody had to move under their own power. if you're going to go under your own power, we're going to eliminate those who are helping and those who are being helped.
Well, we didn't go 2 miles until they started dropping out. At that time, they were shooting you.
Every one of us were sick. I had 104 fever. The man to my immediate right was executed because he couldn't keep up. There were about 500 Filipinos marching ahead of us. I don't know how many of those were executed on that march.
Some of them just fell down on the road because of tiredness, nothing to eat. But there are so many people along the road, on the area where we're passing, people, civilians having food, handing their food, trying to give to us, but we cannot break the line.
Sketches drawn from memory by survivors provide the most graphic accounts of the ordeal. Thousands perished as American and Filipino prisoners were forced to tramp miles to detention camps north of Manila. The captives suffered a series of horrors which became known as the Bataan Death March.
There were people being shot there and these two-handed swords cutting people's heads off. That death march was just plain murder. That was, as you walked along, you could smell. The odor was terrible from guys that had been left a day or so ahead of time and laying in the sun, you know. And they left them people laying there.
Hello, this is Neil Bertrand of Cypress Cove Publishing. Today I'm at the home of Mr. James Bollock. He was a World War II serviceman. He was in the Philippines, and he was captured along with several thousand others by the Japanese, and he is a survivor of the Bataan Death March. He was a prisoner of war held by the Japanese, and he has an experience that he wrote about, and he has his book here, Bataan Death March, A Soldier's Story, and this book is available on Amazon.com. Today, I am talking to him about my book that I wrote, Dad's War Photos, Adventures in the South Pacific. So, Mr. Bollock, thank you for meeting with me today. And I would like for you to tell the people about your experience in the Bataan Death March and the photos you took and what happened to them.
Yeah, I joined the Army Air Corps in 1940, and in 1941 took part in Louisiana maneuvers where we trained with dive bombers. And just as soon as the maneuvers ended, we were shipped overseas. And we left San Francisco on November 1st and arrived in the Philippines on November 20th. And 18 days later, we were already at war with Japan. And unfortunately, 4 months later, I was also a POW of the Japanese. During the fighting, right when the war broke out, I bought a camera, and I bought all the film that I could find, which was 8 rolls of 35 millimeter film. And all through the fighting, I took pictures. But unfortunately, on account of the surrender, none were ever developed. And when I heard that we were being surrendered, what I did was, instead of letting them be taken by the Japanese, I buried them in the jungle where we were bivouacked. And never did go back for them. And as far as I know, they still may be there. But they were as I look back now, after the war, we had the opportunity to go back and look for things that we buried. But I'd been a POW for 3.5 years, and I was anxious to get home, and I was not interested in going back, but I kind of wish now that I had, because I would have pictures probably comparable to what your book has.
Okay. So today I'm here because Mr. Bollock wrote the foreword for my book, that the words that he wrote blessed me so much, talking about his experience and his photos. I'm here to give him a copy of my book. Thank you very much, sir, for how you helped me out, and appreciate it a whole lot.
Well, I thank you very much.
Thank you.
Very nice looking book.
Thank you very
I'm
much.
anxious to read it.
All right. Okay, well, that's it for today. Well, thank you very much.
He was a great man. He was a great soldier. Our dad is our hero.
A World War II hero, Ramon Regalado was a soldier in the Philippines when the Japanese attacked after Pearl Harbor. Earlier this year, he told us it was an honor to fight alongside U.S. soldiers as a machine gunner for the Philippine Scouts.
I'm very proud to defend democracy.
But after months of fighting, the Japanese took the Philippines. Starving and diseased, Ramon and thousands of other soldiers were forced to walk more than 60 miles. It became known as the Bataan Death March.
Because we sacrificed together for 4 months without food, no supply.
He would escape and later rejoin the military, ultimately driving the Japanese out. But President Truman would revoke U.S. benefits promised to Filipino soldiers, and it would not be until this year that Congress would finally honor them. A few weeks ago, at the age of 100, Ramon was presented his Congressional Gold Medal in his hospital bed, surrounded by family.
It was bittersweet, well-deserved, long-awaited, and he got to see it. Even though he was, aging, ailing, he was still fighting, and I think he was fighting for us.
On December 16th, Ramon died. His family says he left behind a legacy of bravery, and he fought to make sure high schoolers would learn about the Bataan Death March.
It will finally be in the history books.
A Filipino survivor of the Bataan Death March has died at the age of 100. Ramon Regalado passed away on December 16th in El Cerrito, California. Born in the Philippines in 1917, Regalado was a machine gun operator with the Philippine Scouts during World War II. In 1942, the Scouts, along with the U.S. Army troops, were forced to surrender to the Japanese after fighting on Bataan Peninsula. Thousands of Filipino and American troops were forced to march an estimated 65 miles to Camp O'Donnell, a prison camp. After being captured, Regalado escaped and joined a resistance movement against the Japanese. He moved to the United States in 1950 to work for the U.S. Navy. In October, Regalado and other Filipino World War II veterans were honored with a U.S. Congressional Gold Medal.
On the 19th and 20th, the ships arrived in Lingayen Bay, so we were being invaded. But now we are standing out there about 15 or 20 hours, and we looked at each other and we said, you know, we're at war. And that was really touched me. And I had problems coming from a Christian family of even thinking about killing anybody. And I thought, boy, this is going to be tough, because even though we're ordnance, we probably would be faced with that. And when we were told that there was close to 100,000, they estimated 100,000 troops, Japanese troops, that it would be, we would have a rough time. I was carrying a BAR and was trying to find some of my men to get them and round them up and so forth and take them, get them out of there. And a Jap jumped out of the bushes and lunged at me with his bayonet. His bayonet caught where the strap, the shoulder strap of the BAR and the latch to the stock. It hit that little clip, and with the force that he had, pulled it out of my hand. And he's right by the side of me. So I grabbed him and pulled him to me, and I took my hunting knife and I stuck it in him and stuck it all the way through him and a little bit into me. And in other words, and I didn't know, and it went evidently right below his rib cage, but anyway, and that was a hunting knife with a pretty good sized blade. And so I thought, my best thought is I don't know where I killed him or not, so I'll just drag him over here to the bluff and throw him off the bluff. And the way I threw him off, it was about 500 foot, so I drug him over and threw him off that bluff. We would hear Tokyo Rose telling us no reinforcements were on the way. And we would hear the Voice of America station at Corregidor telling us that there were reinforcements coming. We then, with a few men that we had left that were able to fight and all, and the 31st Infantry, we took that time to sort of get ourselves together and plan what we was going to do. So we held them another 2 months. We had heard some trucks and tanks, and as we got down to the road, we would have to go down to Marvelis airstrip where we were supposed to report to. The tank came on up behind us, and behind that tank was some more soldiers with some other prisoners, and we marched down, and this was getting late in the afternoon, to the Marvelis runway, where they had them all lined up there, and we lined up and spaced out like hand to hand. We stood there, and they looked at everything we had, and they took whatever they wanted, took watches, and they took all kinds of things. And they took our canteens and poured the water out and gave us the canteen back. And then we saw some guys that had some things were Japanese, and they just took them and pulled them out back, and you could hear them shooting them out back. And so we started a march, and it was late in the afternoon, sort of late. It wasn't sundown yet, it was getting late. And we marched that night, and the next morning, it got over, and we were just coming out of the mountains, and the picture that was taken by the Japanese was taken that morning. We were devastated. And here we realized that we had been captured, and we realized that these people were beating and killing people. Everything that we get now, we've got to be strong to sustain life. And as we walked down that hill, it was sad times for us. And we looked over at our flagpole, where our American flag was flying, had been all the time when we go out there. And there was a Japanese flag flying. And I'm telling you, that was sinking time, hard times for me. I thought about home. I thought about everything and the possibility that could happen to me. Not knowing where we were going, the uncertainty and everything. It was really tough.
Okay, this is Harmon Houghton. We're here at the Pueblo Culture Center in Albuquerque, broadcasting live with Native Media Network. And next to me is Mr. Tony Reyna, former governor from Taos Pueblo and a leader. and one of the last survivors of the Bataan Death March. Tony has been an inspiration to generations of people, and including myself over the many years. And can you hear this okay, Tony? We'd like to kind of ask a little bit on what your thoughts on this honoring for the veterans here at the Pueblo Culture Center. I don't know if you have any comments.
This is very unusual gathering. The first time they're veteran meeting everywhere, but this particular one is very unique, and I very much appreciate being invited. And there's a lot of talk. When I first entered my Army in March 1941, and I was assigned to Battery C of Santa Fe, New Mexico. And then I was assigned 200 Coast Artillery, Battery C. And then, of course, from there we went to China with Bataan, then finally on the right across corridor, we were ordered to lay our arms. So I hid all my shell, and I gave me an empty rifle. That was the beginning of a dead march. For that about noon. And then about in the evening, that must have been 6-8 miles of hike. And from there, we spend the night. Next day, it just happened that there was a truck loaded with veterans, and I hopped onto the back tailgate, and they helped me pull me in. That's how I wanted to Bataan Death March. Yeah. When I got there, well, see, there were 12 of us from Taos Pueblo, and I was the 12th one. And then we went on detail. Then in June, I was assigned to burial detail. I must have buried over 1,000 men. Every day. We got 15, 20, 25 men dying every day. And I was part of a detail. We took them about half a mile away. We took their dog tags, and the rest they were dumped in the pool. It was a burial. And then there's so much to talk about. But the most important thing is I was the only one in China, Bataan, Manchuria, where I was liberated in 1945. And I came home. That's the first time I saw my mother and dad. I didn't get to see them before I left, but it was a great feeling. They met me in Santa Fe at the reception center, and we came from San Francisco to Santa Fe on a train, and finally arrived at Santa Fe, a reception center where all the parents were waiting. My father and mother were there, and my brother and his wife. And we had then from there we came home. And we arrived home at Taos Pueblo about midnight. And then after midnight, next day, they mistake me for my brother Dell. He was called Dell. I had a brother that was in the Navy. He was Delfino. They thought I was Delfino, so I had to correct him. Antonio. Yeah. And
your courage is really an inspiration to everybody.
I was determined to survive.
Thank you for honoring us with
That's
this.
what counts, determination. I went through hell on earth.
I think they're looking to honor you at the front over there now.
We're going for
Thank
it.
you for giving us this message.
We know how it is to get started. Lack of food, yeah.
Thank you very much.
December 8th, 1941. The Japanese Imperial Army launches a devastating attack on the Philippines. U.S. and Filipino troops are forced to retreat to the Bataan Peninsula. Among the defenders is Army soldier John Mims.
Doing this in honor of the people that I lost in Bataan, and since Bataan that have died, that were my friends, very close friends, that saved the United States from having to speak Japanese.
Today, Mims is one of the last remaining survivors of the Bataan Death March. Each year, thousands come to White Sands Missile Range in New Mexico. Under the hot desert sun, they run or walk 26.2 miles, a grueling marathon designed to commemorate the sacrifices of those who fought on the Philippines.
You know, it's challenging, but it is definitely an honor to be able to honor those who have sacrificed for us, the soldiers who didn't make it and the soldiers who did make it. It's definitely an honor for us to be able to even do part of what they did.
God bless you, sir. Along the route, survivors shook hands and encouraged the participants.
Where are my dog tags today?
This is an intersection of two marches, really. One 26 miles long, the other 69 years.
I appreciate them marching because they're doing it in honor of the people that I lost in Bataan. But now, the reason I wouldn't miss coming out here for anything in the world, the people that's coming out here wants to see me or someone that was there.
Andrew Branstad, White Sands Missile Range, New Mexico.
Sibilyan ako noon eh. Apa. Ngayon, ang bawat sibilyan, sumusunod sa sundalo dahil sa taas. Apa. Ngayon, noong huling kahuli-hulihan na, nabiyag na, sumuko na eh. Inilakan niya yung mga sibilyan kasama ng sundalo. Apa. Ngayon, kung ako tigasaman, pagdating ko sa saman, tumakas ako. Apa. Pero kapatid ko, nagala sa kapas. Pero sasabihin ko, napakahirap ang kinawa. Pati sundalo, napakahirap. Doon maraming namatay sa kapas.
Nabalaba kami sa Maramiles. Kaya rin balik namin yung Region 3 hanggang Pampanga. Ayun, nung ako'y nakatayo ng ganyan. Kaya pala, ito aking pantalong ngayon. May butas yung bala, tatlo.
Nadaplisan po ng 3 bala.
3 bala. Akala naman kasama ko, may sugat ang tuhod ko. Pinangalanas ako nakaligtas sa bala. Kaya ako, may nakala ko ng bala. Ay, kunti naman ako, durog ang tuhod ko.
kami ng hating gabi. Magmula doon sa Municipal Hall ng Maribeles at nakarating ngayon tayo dito sa Balanga kaninang ikasampu ng umaga. Ngayon ipagpapatuloy pa rin ito hanggang umabot sa Kapas bukas ng hapon.
My name is Robert Hudson. I am the son of a survivor of the Death March. My father was in the 31st Infantry Regiment. As I was living at Bataan, I decided, well, can you at least afford to paint all the markers? And they said, yes, we can do that, because the greatest cost is the labor and the transportation from Manila for labor and everything. And I said, well, I will provide the labor. I will provide everything else. You just send me the paint, and I will make sure the markers have been taken care of. I've done that with my wife, Rosalie. We've done that for 7 years.
If you ask why we commemorate defeat, quote-unquote, then you do not understand the history behind it. Doon yung first real test natin as a nation. And I think the boys of Bataan, both the Filipinos and the Americans, did their job well. No, they fought beyond what many people would expect them to do. And for that reason, I think that also defined us as a race.
It was called a death march not because of how many died. Of the 12,000 Americans, only about 1,700 lived to come home. But they called it a death march because of the way they died. If you stopped on the road, you were killed. If you had a malaria attack, they killed you. If you had to stop to defecate, they killed you. If you just couldn't take another step, they killed you. And how did they kill you? They'd either bayonet you to death, shoot you, or in some cases decapitate you. They did not give us water. They gave us no food. The temperature was about 108 degrees. The Americans that were captured, a good 80% of them had malaria. Another 50% had dysentery. So we were gunshot wounds, malaria, dysentery, and we had to walk this distance that they wanted us to. Under these conditions, it was unbearable. I think that what kept me going is this: about the second day, I made the decision that the only way I was going to survive was if I started to set goals for myself. And I would walk, and I would see a herd of caribou in the distance, and I would say to myself, I must get to that herd of caribou. I didn't know where they were. I didn't know how far they were. I didn't know how many days it was going to take me or how many hours. But I made every effort to get to that herd of caribou. No matter what happened. The Japanese told me to smile, I did. They told me to sit, I sat. They told me to march, I marched. They hit me, it was okay. They broke my nose, knocked my teeth out. They split my head open. But I still had to go to reach those herd of caribou. Then when I got to the herd of caribou, then I'd find another goal, and another goal, and another goal. Every day was another goal. From that day on, I've lived my whole life that way. And those people who hold on to a grudge, I think, have a very different philosophy of life. And that's how they live. By not holding on to a grudge, by being able to roll with the punch, I think it's a lot easier to live. My life is a lot happier because I've learned how to adjust to adversities and how to deal with it. The Disabled American Veterans, I'm a lifetime member. I believe that they are an organization that spells out clearly what their goals are. You know, Disabled American Veterans doesn't mean that you have to be disabled with the loss of a limb. You could be disabled other ways. And I do believe that every man that came back from Bataan are disabled in some manner, either mentally, emotionally, through physical attributes. And I think we're all a member of the DAV in one way or the other. If we're not, we certainly should be. But the DAV was very kind to me in many ways, and I'm very appreciative of that.
Every soldier has a story. Few are as long, varied, and valorous as Melvin Henry Nestaby's. The retired 88-year-old Chief Warrant Officer bravely served his country during both World War II and Korea.
I think there's 24 lines on a common notebook paper. I think I could fill in all 24 in places where I was that far from death, with a millionth of a second, that far.
Nestaby had an early view of World War II as a private in the Philippines.
They bombed Pearl Harbor on the 7th, and they bombed Manila, where I was, on the 8th. They bombed us within 2 hours. We were bombed at 9:30 the day they bombed Pearl Harbor.
Private Nestaby was a scout. He was out first when his battalion was trying to retake the big line. He had the Browning automatic rifle.
I got pinned down in a little opening with quite a big stone, and I couldn't cover it, so I ducked behind a rock. And there was a machine gun ahead of me that kept me there because they were shooting at me constantly. The bullets were going by. Them bullets going by your ear within a half inch or an inch sound like a mosquito. Well, I had many of those mosquitoes go by me that close, till two of my buddies worked around, come up behind that machine gun, and of course knocked them out. Then I got out of there.
After 155 consecutive days of fierce fighting, the outgunned and outmanned U.S. troops eventually surrendered to the Japanese in April 1942.
And they landed at Lingayen Gulf up north, estimated at as much as 100 of them to one of us. And we marched for 150 miles from Lingayen Gulf to Bataan. We put up resistance to every foot of the way, but we couldn't hold them. But we give them a tough time, I'll guarantee you.
After volunteering at the ripe old age of 20, Nestaby's 21st birthday was spent as a prisoner of war in Bilibid prison. He was a rare survivor of the Bataan Death March, referred to as the hike by survivors. The Japanese forced U.S. soldiers to march through malaria-infested scorching heat to the prisoner of war camp. Thousands didn't make it due to starvation, murder, disease, and dehydration. Nestaby was interned in 4 different Japanese POW camps until his release in September 1945.
But fortunately, after about 6 months, I was shipped to Cabanatuan 1 up north. I was there 2 years. Every day I had to work on the farm. I had to use a hoe or a pickaxe or a rake every single day. Yep, but I survived.
After serving over 20 years in the U.S. Army, Chief Warrant Officer Nestaby is retired. but hasn't lost his fervor for the Army or his nation. If called, he would join the fight tomorrow to ensure our nation's freedom.
I was a soldier. I am a soldier. I will always be a soldier. I am Chief Warrant Officer, Melvin H. Nestle, retired from the United States Army.
Drive down Bandera Road and you'll find a veteran with American pride unparalleled to many. What you won't know just by looking at him is that he was part of a story thousands did not live to tell.
A long time ago, man. Jesus Christ.
One of the most atrocious war crimes in history, the Bataan Death March, has since dropped from the minds of many today. But the scars from this 65-mile march of torture and death still sit in 99-year-old Trinidad Martinez's mind.
You have to keep going.
Events leading up to the march started after the surprise Japanese attack on Pearl Harbor during World War II.
Roughly 90% of the participants either died during the march or have died since. It turned out that MacArthur's Philippine army was entirely unready. The troops were not trained, they didn't have weapons, there was no stockpile of food or medicine or ammunition. So on April 9th, the commander of the forces on Bataan, General King, surrendered.
And the Japanese had no respect for surrender.
These were soldiers no longer. They had surrendered. They were beneath contempt. They started marching them north to eventually putting them on trains and taking them to a place called Camp O'Donnell. The march, including the train route, is what's called the Death March.
It's not clear exactly how many endured the march, but it's estimated thousands of troops died along the way. They were executed if they could not continue marching.
Let's let all the people dead. Why, I don't know. They never touched me.
The United States used the march as propaganda against the Japanese to inspire Americans to join the war effort. The treatment was so brutal, and Martinez says he became so exhausted that some thought he was dead when he arrived at the prison camp. Somehow, he managed to wake up.
When they got them off the train, the dying and the dead were pulled off to one side, and then the rest of them would be marched to the camp. If he was unconscious and looked dead, he would have just been tossed into this pile with the other bodies.
He believes he survived because he never faltered.
I had my own 2 containers of water. I just put it in the mouth. But they tried to go get water. That's really bad, man. But I make it all the way.
Martinez was awarded more than a dozen medals during his time in the military.
This was a real and a very important chapter in American history, in world history, and for us to forget it, I think is a mistake.
There may not be much time to hear the stories of survivors. For the first time, Martinez and his family are headed to the commemoration of the Bataan Death March in New Mexico. It's the 75th anniversary. They're hopeful his story won't be forgotten.
God bless America.
That much route is about 64 miles, and 10,000 Filipinos died in 34 miles. So that's like saying about 100 per mile.
Mm-hmm.
So maybe 50 per mile. And then also I wanted to honor the people. 24th Cavalry, because they were the ones who held the Japanese from defeating us quickly in Bataan. But what really defeated us was hunger.
Yeah. Can you believe it's been 75 years?
I can't even believe that I'm 96.
And when you read your own book and you think about what you went through, what you had to survive, what's the most amazing part of the story to you?
Well, something I left out, which I felt that some of the life on the battlefronts is not palatable.
So I left out one part where he realized the horror of war. Was after combat, you bury the dead man and you look into their pockets and for whatever they have, and you see pictures in their wallet about their loved ones, a sweetheart, a father, a sister, and that's the worst part of the war, I think, is finding out that people have died just because they were in a different uniform.
I have a World War II story concerning my ring, and it involved also 2 Clemson graduates. It had to do with my incarceration in a Japanese prison camp. The Bataan Death March occurred at the surrender of the American Filipino forces in April of 1942 on the Bataan Peninsula, which is off of the big island of Luzon, the largest island in the Philippine archipelago. Now, we started out on the march, and I fortunately had put in a sock a can of condensed milk when we broke up the little kitchen area down in the woods. So we started out walking, and it soon became very plain to us that this was going to be a hostile environment entirely. Well, when we thought about the surrender, we thought we would be treated as prisoners of war. Well, now this is all a later reflection. While we were down there, we soon realized that there's a certain amount of terror in what's going on, because you saw people getting clubbed with a rifle, punched with a bayonet, and so we soon realized, look, stay out of trouble. Don't try to smile at the guards or anything else. And then while this was going on, we certainly soon realized nothing is as organized. We just marching as a horde of men. Well, we soon realized as we made the march that guards were looking for rings, watches, and in some cases your shoes. We didn't have boots. And so I saw these things being taken off their arms, and then the guy would come up with the bayonet. I took my ring off and I rolled it up in my sleeve, I believe, so that from then on, I became very, very protective of the ring. Never to pull it out and look at it or anything else, but I knew where it was. I was in very, very bad health in prison camp, and there was no medicine, no way of improving your health, and mine deteriorated to the extent that I had my eyes glued shut with a yellow discharge. I had the soles of my feet were covered with little pustules. I had beriberi, which is a malnutritional disease, diarrhea, and I was losing my appetite. And I was teamed up with Henry Leitner and Otis Morgan. Henry was a class of 37, Otis a class of 38. And almost everyone had been stripped of all their personal possessions, especially things like watches, rings, shoes, things of that nature. But I'd managed to keep my ring hidden And I never pulled it out. I always had it tied up in a little piece of rag, put somewhere, some place or another. And then when it got to where I was going to have to be put over in what they call the hospital area in the 0 ward, because that's where they took people that couldn't do anything for us, and no one ever returned from there. Henry Otis took care of me personally, and Otis learned a little bit of Japanese, and he became what we call an in-charge. Otis was able to let it be known that he knew of a gold ring for trade for food. And then one evening he came in from the farm where we worked with a small can of potted meat and a small pullet-sized chicken. Well, Henry got a pail, boiled the chicken, and then they would take the rice that was issued, and they mixed up chicken and rice, and they spoon-fed me because I had this, couldn't see very well for one thing. And then they made chicken with rice and also rice with chicken. But I responded to that so well, my appetite was restored, my eyes cleared up, my feet cleared up, and I was whole again, so to speak. Well, I've often thought about my little gold ring which I'd hidden for so long, and I had no qualms about turning it over to Otis for this exchange because there was nothing else that could be done. But I've always thought about that ring, and when I was married in 1947, my wife, as an engagement present, had my brother, who was a Clemson graduate, replace the ring. Well, at that time my fingers were very slender and small, and I wore it briefly, but soon I couldn't get it on, so I wore it around my neck, but that was kind of tacky. So I put it aside, and then the representative, Mr. Waters of the graduate of Duke University, who is the contract person for the makers of the Clemson ring, at a very great surprise to me at the ring ceremony, presented me with this ring, and I've had it ever since, naturally, and I take a great pride and glory in having a ring that fits and one that I'm very, very proud of. That's what's so remarkable about this story. I love to tell it because it makes me feel good, and also I feel like I'm relating something of importance with regard to faith and to the very fact that I had saved the ring for so long, and then when it went for that, I have never had one regret, naturally, because as I described this turnaround from the benefits of the ring, it was actually, it saved my life. And that's, people, I think, sometimes don't realize how serious I am when I say that it saved my life.